September 3rd, 2012. Outside a butcher shop in Medellin's Belen neighborhood, a 69-year-old woman steps into the evening air. Within moments, an assailant on a motorcycle ends her life, using a method she herself was credited with pioneering decades earlier in Miami. Her name was Griselda Blanco. At her peak, she ran a cocaine empire reportedly generating around $80 million a month. Law enforcement suspected her involvement in dozens, possibly hundreds, of murders across 2 countries. She was convicted of federal drug conspiracy and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder. Yet even those convictions barely scratched the surface of her reign. This is her story. Griselda Blanco Restrepo was born on or around February 15, 1943, in Colombia. Her exact birthplace remains disputed. Some sources cite Cartagena, while others note she was baptized in Santa Marta. What is not disputed is that she grew up in grinding poverty in Medellin. According to some accounts, Blanco was drawn to crime from a very young age. One unverified story, originating from a single source, claims she committed a violent crime as a child of 11. The claim has never been independently confirmed. She married her first husband, Carlos Trujillo, while still young. Together they had 3 sons, Dixon, Uber, and Osvaldo, and built an early criminal enterprise dealing marijuana in Colombia. The marriage ended in divorce, and the circumstances surrounding Trujillo's later death remain unclear. In 1964, Blanco entered the United States illegally using fake documentation. She settled in Queens, New York, alongside her second husband, Alberto Bravo, who was already an active cocaine smuggler. It was a partnership that would change the American drug landscape. Together, Blanco and Bravo built a thriving cocaine importing operation in New York City. They employed creative smuggling methods, including lingerie fitted with secret compartments to transport drugs across borders undetected. Blanco was not merely a participant in the cocaine trade, she was an architect. In a world utterly dominated by men, she commanded loyalty through a combination of business acumen and a reputation for ruthlessness that few dared to test. On April 30th, 1975, a federal grand jury in the Southern District of New York indicted Blanco and 37 co-defendants on charges of conspiring to manufacture, import, and distribute cocaine. It was one of the largest drug conspiracy indictments of its era. Blanco fled to Colombia before authorities could arrest her. That same year, she killed her second husband, Alberto Bravo, during a confrontation after suspecting him of stealing money from their operation. With Bravo eliminated, she consolidated control. She married her first husband, Carlos Trujillo, while still young. Together they had 3 sons, Dixon, Uber, and Osvaldo. Trujillo made his living forging documents and visas, and it was in that world of petty crime that Blanco's own criminal career first took root. The marriage ended in divorce, and the circumstances surrounding Trujillo's later death remain unclear. On July 11, 1979, a daytime attack at Crown Liquors in Dadeland Mall killed a rival cocaine dealer and his bodyguard. The incident is widely attributed to Blanco and is considered the opening salvo of what became known as the Cocaine Cowboy Wars in South Florida. Miami in the early 1980s became a war zone. Blanco's organization was at the center of an epidemic of drug-related violence that overwhelmed local law enforcement and transformed the city's identity. The Dade County Medical Examiner's Office had to rent refrigerated trucks to handle the volume of cases. Her personal life was equally volatile. Her third husband, Dario Sepulveda, was the father of her youngest son, whom Blanco named Michael Corleone, after the character from The Godfather. The name was not ironic. It was aspirational. In 1983, Sepulveda kidnapped young Michael during a custody dispute and took him to Colombia. Blanco's response was characteristically extreme. She had Sepulveda assassinated. For Blanco, family and empire were indistinguishable, and betrayal carried only one penalty. In 1982, Blanco ordered the murder of an associate named Jesus Castro. But the hitmen made a catastrophic error. They killed Castro's 2-year-old son Johnny instead. A child's life, extinguished in a world that had long since lost any boundary between business and barbarism. The hunt for Griselda Blanco began immediately after the 1975 indictment. DEA Special Agent Charles Cecil initiated the effort, filing fugitive reports, issuing passport lookouts, and conducting searches across the country, even checking hospitals and morgues for any trace of her. Blanco proved extraordinarily difficult to locate. She moved frequently, used multiple aliases, and operated through layers of intermediaries designed to insulate her from direct connection to the drugs and the violence. DEA agent Bob Palumbo took over the pursuit and would dedicate approximately a decade of his career to tracking Blanco. It became something close to an obsession, one agent against one of the most powerful drug traffickers in the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the federal drug case was being assembled using cooperative witnesses. Central among them was Carmen Caban, a former drug dealer who agreed to testify for the government. Her testimony would become the backbone of the prosecution's conspiracy case. Blanco had settled into an unlikely location, the quiet Southern California city of Irvine, far from the neon and chaos of Miami. She was living under an assumed identity, hiding in plain sight among the suburban sprawl of Orange County. Palumbo and the DEA finally pinpointed her location. After nearly 10 years of dead ends, false leads, and relentless tracking across 2 continents, they had her address. The decade-long search was about to end. The case against Blanco represented a new era in drug enforcement, one built on years of patience, cross-border intelligence, and the painstaking cultivation of witnesses willing to testify against someone they genuinely feared. On February 17, 1985, DEA agents arrived at Blanco's home in Irvine, California. After a decade on the run, the Godmother of Cocaine was placed under arrest. The woman who had eluded the full weight of U.S. law enforcement was finally in custody. For Bob Palumbo, it was the culmination of years of single-minded pursuit. Blanco had outlasted numerous investigations, fled across borders, and eliminated anyone who threatened her freedom. But she could not outrun a man who simply refused to stop looking. Blanco did not cooperate with authorities. She maintained a posture of defiance throughout the process. But the evidence assembled over a decade, financial records, witness testimony, and the sheer documented scale of her operation, spoke volumes she could not silence. The federal prosecution centered on the 1975 indictment, the original conspiracy charges she had fled a decade earlier. Carmen Caban's testimony provided the critical narrative linking Blanco to the manufacturing, importation, and distribution of cocaine on a massive scale. While awaiting trial, the state of Florida prepared its own case. Prosecutors charged Blanco with 3 counts of first-degree murder for the killings of drug dealers Alfredo and Grisel Lorenzo, and for the death of 2-year-old Johnny Castro. The murder case relied heavily on the testimony of Jorge Ayala, known as Rivi, a hitman who had carried out killings on Blanco's orders. His willingness to testify seemed to guarantee a first-degree murder conviction, but the case was about to unravel in the most improbable way. In July 1985, Blanco was convicted on 1 count of conspiracy to manufacture, import, and distribute cocaine. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and fined $25,000, a fraction of what her empire had generated. The Florida murder prosecution was expected to deliver the heavier blow, potential life sentences on first-degree murder charges. But then, Jorge Ayala, the star witness, was caught having phone sex with secretaries from the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office itself. The scandal obliterated Ayala's credibility as a witness. A man who had agreed to testify about murders he personally committed had compromised the entire case through conduct that was both absurd and devastating to the prosecution. With the first-degree murder case fatally weakened, prosecutors offered Blanco a plea deal. In 1998, she pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder and received 3 concurrent 20-year sentences. Including time served on both the federal drug conviction and the state murder sentences, Blanco spent approximately 19 years behind bars. For a woman suspected of involvement in dozens to possibly hundreds of killings, it was a fraction of the justice many felt was owed. In 2004, Blanco was released from prison and immediately deported to Colombia. She returned to Medellin, the city where her story had begun decades earlier, reportedly living quietly and in relative obscurity. Griselda Blanco's assassination in 2012 remains unsolved. Her killer has never been publicly identified. The method used, an assailant on a motorcycle, mirrored a technique she was credited with pioneering during the Miami drug wars. It was a final, brutal irony. 3 of Blanco's 4 sons were themselves killed in circumstances connected to the drug trade. Her youngest, Michael Corleone Blanco, was later convicted of drug trafficking. The cycle she set in motion consumed the family she built. The Dadeland Mall incident and the cocaine cowboy wars left scars on Miami that took a generation to heal. Blanco's reign of terror contributed to a murder rate that, at its peak, made South Florida one of the most dangerous places in the United States. Blanco has since been mythologized in documentaries, television series, and music, but the mythology obscures a harder truth, that her empire was built on the destruction of countless lives, from rival dealers to bystanders, to a 2-year-old child whose only crime was proximity. Griselda Blanco remains one of the very few women to reach the absolute summit of the international drug trade. Her story is not one of empowerment. It is a study in what happens when brilliance is married to absolute moral vacancy, and the wreckage it leaves behind. Griselda Blanco was convicted of 3 murders. Law enforcement across 2 countries suspected her of involvement in dozens more, possibly hundreds. Her killer was never found. A new case drops every day. Subscribe so you never miss one.